He was a hard-working single father with a heart of gold.
He was always there for her, and he let her know that your dad is here, whatever you need.
He loved people, and I'm proud that he did and tried to help people all he can.
But there was more to this beloved nursing assistant than met the eye.
He did have several girlfriends. He played the field.
It's safe to say he had some women trouble.
And when obsession leads to murder, detectives must unravel the truth behind not just one, but two twisted love triangles.
She was his possession, and nobody was gonna have his possession.
Jealousy is a very dangerous thing.
March 8th, 2010. It's 10 p.m. on a quiet night in Jackson, Mississippi, as Justin Smith parks his car outside his apartment complex. As he begins walking towards the building, he notices something strange on the ground.
Something almost like a shadow, and he's not sure what it is, but it captures his attention. It's not an animal, it's something that's much, much larger.
So he realizes it's a man lying on the ground. He really has no idea whether this guy's passed out, drunk, or what, so he goes over to check on him.
All of a sudden, this blood starts dripping everywhere. Obviously, this person was shot in the chest.
Smith recognizes the man as someone who lives in the building, but doesn't know his name. Fearing the shooter might still be close by, he immediately calls 911.
Probably like any of us would if we saw something like that, it would bring panic. You're in this dark area where anything could happen.
Myself and other detectives responded to the crime scene. At that time, we did not know exactly what was going on. Being in a large apartment complex, we had a lot of bystanders looking around.
Whenever you have like a shooting like this, you're typically gonna have a large group of individuals who's gonna gather around.
As detectives secure the area, paramedics go to work on the victim. But it's quickly apparent nothing can be done to save him.
He wasn't breathing, there was no pulse. It was obvious that he was dead, and he was pronounced dead on the scene.
Detective Jermaine Pullum is one of the investigators assigned to the case. His first order of business is to identify the body, which is lying next to a silver sedan. On the ground, he finds a set of keys.
We realized that the keys belonged to the vehicle that the victim was laying beside. We ran the tag, and the tag came back to a Barry Odom.
Raised just outside of Jackson in the rural town of Lena, Mississippi, Barry Odom was the last person anyone would have expected to meet a violent end.
I think Barry was best known for his athletics and his academics. I don't know which one would take center stage, probably his academics.
He was a very popular fellow, he was. Did sports, football and basketball, and he had a lot of friends.
Barry had a reputation just being an all-around great guy, willing to give you a straight off their back.
Intelligent, hardworking, and compassionate, Barry used his gifts to help others, working as a nursing assistant at St. Dominic Hospital in Jackson.
Barry was real smart. We tried to encourage him to go into the medical field to be a doctor. And then he became a CNA, which they go out and see patients.
Barry was the type of person that really just enjoyed older people and their company and their wisdom.
In his late 20s, Barry's girlfriend Michelle became pregnant, and they gave birth to a little girl they named Adia. From that moment on, Barry's priorities changed.
One of the most exciting things in his life was becoming a dad. There was nothing else like it. He didn't know anything about taking care of a baby, but he'd jump in and he'd do whatever it took to make sure he got the job done from the time she was a little thing.
If you were asking what he was proudest of, I don't think money or anything else would come close to the love he had for his daughter.
But while Barry was devoted to being the best father he could, the same couldn't be said of his commitment to Michelle.
I always encouraged him. I would say, Barry, Michelle is a wonderful girl and a wonderful mother. I said, so it looked like it's time. And he would just give me a laugh and say, I don't know, Mama. I really believe he wanted to marry. I'm not sure why he didn't. Sometimes you keep looking and you look too hard that you overlook what you already have.
Barry and Michelle eventually split up, but the two remained friendly enough to raise Adia without any difficulties.
He would call me and check on me. He'd be like, how's your mom doing? So I knew the love was there between them.
Barry worked hard to provide for his daughter, even taking on an additional job.
When he wasn't working at the hospital, he was working for Jackson Paper Company, and that was just a way for him to pick up some extra money.
Romance seemed to be the last thing on Barry's mind. That is until he met 34-year-old Cheryl McGee in the spring of 2009.
One day, as he was driving on his route, he ended up near the back of her job. And out of the window, she sees Barry. And Barry sees her, and she's blowing kisses out of the window. They both were single parents. They both were in the medical field. They were young and both looking for a new life.
The two began dating, but with so little free time, Barry and Cheryl would often have to steal away for some alone time.
Barry and Cheryl was known to make plans to meet at hotels where they could share intimate time together. That was their time together.
But now, almost a year after they met, Barry Odom is dead, shot by an unknown assailant. He appears to have 2 gunshot wounds in his chest. Detectives find Barry's wallet still in his pocket, with cash and credit cards inside, which seems to rule out an armed robbery.
Usually if somebody was gonna rob you, they would take your wallet and then shoot you.
It would appear this was not, some just random crime. Somebody was out to get Barry that night, and they accomplished that goal.
The big questions were who killed Barry Odom and why.
Coming up, investigators take a closer look at Barry's personal life and discover there is more to the kind-hearted nursing assistant than meets the eye.
It really made me wonder, what happens in people's minds, what snaps to make them do what they do.
In Jackson, Mississippi, detectives are working to determine who shot 36-year-old Barry Odom and why.
His body is lying in the parking lot right next to a car. Apparently shot twice in the chest, execution style.
This case had all the earmarks of being a targeted hit. Like this was an ambush. Someone maybe lying in wait on Barry to arrive out there.
Investigators have ruled out armed robbery, so they begin searching the area for clues.
We looked for a shell casing or a possible weapon. We didn't find anything.
No, shell casings on the ground can mean several things. It could mean that the casings were discharged but picked up. It could mean that this was a revolver where the shell casings are not discharged.
Detectives also interview the other residents, hoping to find an eyewitness to the shooting.
It's an apartment complex that houses a lot of people, and it was only 10 p.m., so they're thinking a lot of people were still awake when the murder happened.
Given how close his body was to doors and windows and balconies, investigators certainly thought that a number of people would have seen what happened.
Obviously, if a person has been shot, you're gonna hear some gunshots.
Several residents say they heard loud noises, but either ignored the sounds or were too afraid to look out their windows. When investigators check Barry's apartment for clues, it appears to be undisturbed. For now, the only thing they can do is notify Barry's parents of his death.
My wife and I had gone to bed and we were asleep, and the phone was ringing. That time of night, we knew it was serious. We knew it wasn't good.
I answered, and it was a man. And he goes and asks me, do I have a son? I said yes, and he said there has been I'm not sure if he used the word accident or if he used another term. And he said, I'm afraid that he didn't make it. And I don't remember anything else after that.
When I picked the phone up and the police told me what had happened, it overwhelmed me for a while. And I had to get my composure to talk to him my own self, because it was just like being shot yourself.
He just wasn't the kind of guy that had enemies. Everybody loved Barry.
Barry's parents agreed to drive to Jackson to assist in the investigation. Meanwhile, detectives continue processing the crime scene. When the coroner arrives to move the body, they find his cell phone on the ground beneath him.
We logged the phone as evidence, and then we took it to headquarters.
Cell phones are vital to investigators because it can give them all kinds of history as far as location, recent phone calls, text messages, etc. It's really a vital instrument for police officers to use in solving a crime.
After obtaining a search warrant, investigators begin examining the phone for clues. Luckily, it's an older model and not password protected.
It's kind of hard to get the thing if his phone is locked, but Mr. Odom phone wasn't locked.
It turns out Barry made quite a few calls that day, and surprisingly, the last one had been to police at 9:48, around the time he was killed.
Apparently, Barry did call 911 after he was shot, and police officers went back and looked at that cell phone history and did find that phone call into 911 dispatch, but unfortunately, he was not able to say anything. Had he lived just a minute longer, he may have been able to say who murdered him.
The call before that was at 9:30 p.m. It was from a woman named Cheryl.
She was the last person he talked to. So if you want to talk to her, just see exactly what she knows, try to determine whether she played in a role in this crime.
When detectives call the number, Barry's girlfriend Cheryl McGee eventually answers.
Cheryl couldn't believe it that he was dead because she said they just saw each other.
Cheryl's demeanor was she was emotionally distraught and very, very concerned. This was very devastating to her.
According to Cheryl, they'd made plans to get together again later that night, but Barry had never shown up.
When she tried to reach Barry's phone later on, he was not able to answer. Started to wonder what could possibly be wrong, because most of the time he was able to answer his phone right away.
While Cheryl seems to be genuinely upset, investigators have some suspicions.
In a target killing, you're obviously going to look at the folks, close around that individual.
Not only is she Barry's girlfriend, but she's the last known person that saw Barry alive. That really points the finger at her and what is her potential involvement in this murder. So police have a lot of questions for her.
Since it's almost 2 a.m., detectives postpone the interview and ask Cheryl to meet them at the police station first thing the next morning.
It's hard for police to get a good read on somebody doing a phone interview. You really have to sit in the same room with them to get a good physical read on their manifestations, etc., to find out if they're telling the truth or not.
Meanwhile, investigators continue searching Barry's phone records. He also made 2 other calls that afternoon, both to a woman named Joyce.
Police call Joyce to find out if there's anything that she can tell them. When she finds out that Barry's been murdered, she breaks down crying.
She was devastated, really taking it very hard. And that obviously indicated that she was close to him. She cared about him.
When police ask Joyce how she knows Barry, her answer comes as a bit of a surprise.
She tells them that she's Barry's girlfriend. Well, that's interesting because police just got off the phone with another woman who claimed that she was Barry's girlfriend.
Like Cheryl, Joyce says she'd seen Barry that afternoon, and they had plans to see each other later in the evening.
Obviously, you would look at these 2 individuals. Could this have been some lovers trying a shooting?
Coming up, detectives sit down with both of Barry's girlfriends, but their tangled relationship only raises more questions.
When someone is jealous, you have a very deadly situation.
Police are investigating the murder of Barry Odom, a 36-year-old single father in Jackson, Mississippi.
My mom waited till I woke up the next morning to tell me. I just immediately started crying and I was upset, and she rocked me and held me. It was an evil, careless, selfish act that can't be undone.
But investigators have just learned that the kind-hearted father was also juggling 2 girlfriends at the same time.
The day that Barry was killed, he had set up dates with 2 different women. Both thought they had dates with him for that evening, but did either really know what was going on?
Barry is a single guy. He is not married. And I think from his point of view, he was simply dating, and he was dating 2 women at the same time. I think he has a very tangled web that he has woven.
Investigators have set up a face-to-face interview with girlfriend number 1, Cheryl McGee. While detectives wait for her to arrive, they meet with Barry's parents to see what they can tell them about their son's love life.
Once he was grown and left home, it was kind of like, well, I can't keep eyes on you. I don't know everything that goes on in your life. I don't know any specific details about who he dated or how long or anything like that.
He didn't share that with me because my response to him would probably have been more father and Christian-like. It would have been a little slower than probably what a young man would probably want to hear at his age.
His parents really couldn't give us who his exact girlfriend was, so we just had to take the 2 ladies that he had and try to find out what was going on.
Around 9 a.m., Cheryl McGee arrives. It's apparent to police that she's still affected by the news of Barry's death.
When we talked to Cheryl, and she advised us that she just seen him, her and Barry was a girlfriend and boyfriend.
She says they had been dating for almost a year, and she was clearly invested in the relationship.
She was just completely distraught, crying, very, very upset.
Cheryl and Barry had made plans for that evening. Cheryl explained that Barry was into it, and they had been texting each other all day.
Cheryl tells police she called Barry around 4:30 or 5 p.m. to let him know that she had booked a room for the 2 of them at a nearby motel.
Getting a hotel was something that they did quite often, so Barry agreed to that.
When Cheryl got to the motel around 8 p.m., Barry was already there, waiting for her in the parking lot.
She described how she had run a couple of errands, she dropped her ex-husband off, and then went back to the hotel room where Barry was waiting.
Cheryl says they were in the room together until approximately 9:30, when Barry suddenly told her he had to leave.
Barry mentioned that he had to go, so Cheryl was just under the impression that he had errands to do, she had errands to do that night.
She needed to see about her daughter, but she had planned to see him after she finished. She left after about 15 minutes.
According to Cheryl, she and Barry had agreed to return to the motel after they were done. The only problem was, Barry hadn't specified exactly when he'd be back.
She goes home to check on her daughter, and she waits for Barry to call. He never does.
A little while later, Cheryl got the call from police saying Barry was dead. But detectives want to know, why were they meeting in a motel in the first place?
She seemed to have no idea really what they were after. She said Barry liked motels because they were exciting, so they hooked up there about every week or so.
When police ask Cheryl point blank if she had anything to do with Barry's death, she says no. But is she telling the truth?
In the time between Barry leaving the motel and Cheryl calling him to check on him, she could have easily left the hotel to follow him and caught him with another woman.
Cheryl believed that Barry was her man, that Barry was there just for her. If she would have found out that maybe he had someone else, that could have been a motive, for her to kill him.
Detectives decide not to tell Cheryl about girlfriend number 2. And for now, Cheryl is considered a key witness rather than a suspect. Next, investigators turn to Joyce to see what she knows about girlfriend number 1.
So what police are trying to find out is, did one of these women that they're talking to know more than the other? And police are trying to find out what's the nature of each of their relationships with Barry Odom.
Coming up, investigators question Barry Odom's other girlfriend and discover another angle to the relationship.
You don't just have one love triangle, you have two. So the possibility of who could potentially be involved here is exponential.
The day after Barry Odom was found gunned down outside his apartment complex in Jackson, Mississippi, detectives are piecing together what happened. They've already spoken to the first of Barry's girlfriends, Cheryl McGee, and are considering her a key witness rather than a suspect. Now they're about to question girlfriend number 2.
Joyce is the other woman that Barry's been seeing. She claims to police that she also had a date with him the night he was killed.
Barry's cell phone shows a call made to Joyce at approximately 7:30 p.m., just 30 minutes before he met Cheryl in the parking lot of the motel. Detectives want to know what that call was about. When they sit down to interview Joyce, she seems to be just as upset as Cheryl was.
You could tell that this was very devastating to her as well.
Just like Cheryl, Joyce describes her relationship with Barry as being very close.
She tells police that her and Barry have been dating for several months and that things are starting to get very serious between the two of them.
They was looking at maybe moving in together.
But does that mean Barry had managed to pull the wool over both of their eyes? Or was one of the women lying?
So Barry had spent the night making love to Cheryl in the motel room, but Joyce said that they were supposed to be moving in together. So was he that big of a player, or had Joyce just convinced herself there was more to the relationship than there really was?
Detectives ask Joyce about her communication with Barry the day before. Like Cheryl, Joyce says she'd made plans with him over the phone while he was at work.
So at 9:30 in the morning, she calls Barry and gets in touch with him and says, "Where were you last night?" And he said, "Oh, I'm sorry, I went out with a friend and had a little too much to drink. I turned my phone off."
She believed him and didn't think anything about it. She asked if they were still getting together that afternoon. Barry said yes, and they had plans to meet up shortly after 2.
Joyce says that Barry arrived at her house around 2:30 that afternoon, and that they spent about 45 minutes browsing online for potential houses to rent.
If what Joyce said was true, then it seemed like their relationship was really getting serious. You don't just move in with somebody that you're casually dating.
Around 3:15, Joyce had to get ready for work, so Barry left. Joyce says the next time she heard from him was about 7:30 that evening, but because she was at work, she only had a few minutes to talk.
Joyce said they had made plans to get together after she got off from work at 11. She was going to call him, and if he was up, she was going to drop by his apartment.
Since investigators know Barry left Cheryl a little before 10 p.m., it sounds like the errand he had to run was meeting up with Joyce.
You have to wonder what Barry was thinking. Was he going to hook up with Joyce and then return to the motel and hook up again with Cheryl? Or was he going to make up some excuse along the way? We'll never know.
Joyce tells detectives that she called Barry at 11 p.m., but he didn't answer. At the time, she thought he'd probably just fallen asleep, so Joyce says she went home instead. The next time her phone rang, it was the police.
But Joyce somehow found out that Barry was in a relationship with Cheryl at the same time. She was in a relationship with him. It could lead her to do this crime.
But while she might have a motive, Joyce definitely has something else: an ironclad alibi.
Cheryl told police she last saw Barry at the motel at 9:30. Now, Barry's phone was used to call 911 at 9:50, so police are trying to determine what happened in that 20-minute window. Joyce was confirmed to be at work that evening from 4 p.m. to 11 p.m., so there was no way she could have done it.
However, detectives know that just because Joyce didn't kill Barry doesn't mean she couldn't have hired someone else to do it for her. So, they ask if she is aware that Barry was cheating on her with another woman.
When police told Joyce about Cheryl, she seemed to be genuinely surprised. She really had no idea what was going on. This suggested that Joyce was probably telling the truth.
It seems Joyce doesn't have a motive after all. So given that and her alibi, investigators clear her as a suspect. Police turn their attention to the other people in Barry's life, hoping to find a new lead. One of Barry's co-workers at the paper company, Jeff Miller, is able to give them one.
They talked often, about what was going on with things in their lives. Barry would share things with Jeff.
Jeff said that Barry had come to him asking him what he would do if he found out his girlfriend was cheating on him. Barry had thought that Cheryl had another man.
Barry confronted her about the man, and she said, "I've broken it off. I am not still seeing him."
Jeff tells police that Barry described an incident to him a while before he was shot. Cheryl had spent the night with Barry at his apartment. When she went to leave, he saw a strange man waiting outside. And from the way he was acting, it was clear he wasn't happy to see Cheryl with another man.
The man muttered something under his breath, and then he got into his car and he drove off.
She had told Barry that the man was her ex, and it was no big deal.
Jeff says Cheryl assured Barry that the relationship with her ex was strictly platonic. They had a child together, but that was as far as things went. However, in light of Barry's murder, detectives aren't so sure.
It was not a big deal to Cheryl, but it clearly was a big deal to this guy. You don't stalk your ex-girlfriend outside an apartment unless you're clearly obsessed with her.
Coming up, one love triangle becomes two as detectives track down a new suspect.
It turned this case in a totally different direction.
If I can't have you, nobody could.
Both of the women dating Barry Odom at the time he was shot have been cleared as suspects. But information about another jealous ex has given detectives a new lead.
Now we have another person thrown into the mix, Cheryl McGee's ex, who's clearly still interested in her.
Had he gotten Barry out of the way so he'd have Cheryl all to himself?
So you don't just have one love triangle, you have two. You have Barry dating two women and Cheryl dating two men. So the possibility of who could potentially be involved here is exponential.
Searching for answers, detectives decide to press their key witness, Cheryl McGee, for more information.
Are really looking to see, is she cooperative? Is she nervous? How is she going to respond to the questions that they're asking?
Our job was to find out in depth what's going on with Cheryl and her ex.
Police want to know what the exact nature of Cheryl's relationship with her ex is, and if perhaps she'd been trying to rekindle an old flame. But Cheryl denies the accusation. She insists that the only reason she's been in contact with her ex is because he's been stalking her.
Brian Ellis was Cheryl's ex. They had a child together, and he wanted to get back with her. Cheryl was not interested in getting back together.
Cheryl tells police that she first started dating Brian Ellis in 2006. He was 51 at the time, nearly 20 years older than her.
Cheryl had said she found out about Brian's other relationship in 2008, but since they had a child together, she couldn't make a clean break from him. She had to continue seeing him due to the co-parenting of their daughter.
Cheryl says she tried to keep their contact limited to their daughter, but Ellis didn't allow that to happen.
Cheryl wanted to move on with her life and, leave Brian behind. But Brian, didn't want to let Cheryl go. She was his possession, and he was going to keep her.
Ellis was following Cheryl everywhere, and when he wasn't able to see her, he threatened her.
Cheryl says that once she began dating Barry Odom, the problem only got worse.
She drives over to Barry's apartment to have a date one night, only to find that her ex is in the parking lot watching.
Cheryl claims Ellis even threatened her with violence.
He tells her to stop seeing Barry. He pulls out a gun and says, if you don't stop seeing him, I'm going to kill you and Barry and then kill myself.
When detectives ask Cheryl why she didn't report Ellis's behavior to police, she explains that she was concerned for the safety of her child. She hoped Ellis would eventually get over his feelings of jealousy and move on.
In cases of spousal abuse or stalking behavior, there aren't always easy solutions. She couldn't simply cut off ties and just move to the other side of the country. She still had to have contact with Brian Ellis because of their daughter, so she just deals with it.
But instead of moving on, Ellis's obsession deepened, and he began following Barry as well.
Barry told a friend when he was filling up his car with gas one day that he saw Ellis just staring at him while he was doing that.
And in the weeks before Barry was shot, Ellis's behavior seemed to reach a boiling point.
Barry was in his apartment one day, heard somebody bang on the front door. When he opened it, it was Brian, and he wasn't happy.
Cheryl says Barry tried to reason with him, but Ellis was in no mood for a calm discussion.
Brian had pushed right past Barry into Barry's apartment. He started yelling at Barry to stay away from his woman.
Barry says that Ellis confronted him and pulled a gun out, stuck it right in his face, and said, "If you don't stop dating Cheryl, I'm going to kill you."
Despite being shaken up by the incident, Barry didn't report Ellis to police either.
I think men are pretty stubborn and think that they can handle these matters themselves, and that's exactly what Barry said. He felt that he could handle Ellis without any other involvement.
Cheryl explains that the reason she and Barry began meeting in motels was to avoid run-ins with Ellis. She says the last time she saw him was the night Barry was murdered.
She said she was getting ready to meet Barry at the motel, and Brian had called her asking for a favor.
He was trying to keep his van from being repossessed. He was trying to hand it over to Cheryl's place.
Cheryl agreed to the favor and let Ellis take his van to her house and park it there, and then ultimately she had to give him a ride back home.
Cheryl tells detectives that when she dropped Ellis off, he asked her an unusual question.
He said, "If I get your new boyfriend out of the picture, could we have a second chance?"
As far as investigators are concerned, Brian Ellis has just become their new prime suspect.
He had a motive, he had a gun, and he could have easily followed Cheryl to the motel that night.
Detectives decide to bring Ellis in for questioning. At first, he seems cooperative.
He came in and he sat down in the interview room with us, and Detective Stephen read up Miranda rights. He wasn't nervous or anything. He just sat back, in the chair with a smirk on his face. He didn't really want to answer the questions. I saw where the interview was going. So me and Detective Stevenson, we talked about it, and we kind of came up with the same idea that it's something that he's hiding from us.
After only a few minutes of fruitless questioning, detectives end the interview. Without any concrete evidence to charge him with, police have no choice but to let Ellis go.
All they really have at this point is a lot of suspicion and circumstantial evidence. There's really not enough for an arrest or a conviction.
Coming up, a witness comes forward, giving the investigation new life.
So they keep it all inside, but it's eating them up inside. So she came in and she really told the truth about what happened.
Investigators are focused on 54-year-old Brian Ellis in the murder of Barry Odom. They believe he shot Barry in a fit of jealous rage for dating his ex-girlfriend, Cheryl McGee.
Yeah, all they have at that point is a lot of circumstantial evidence and suspicion. They really don't have anything for an arrest or a conviction.
But it is enough to get a search warrant for Ellis's home.
Inside the house, police find 3 weapons and a whole lot of ammunition. There's a rifle, a shotgun, and a 9mm handgun located inside.
They test bullets from the 9mm handgun, hoping for a match, but the results are inconclusive.
The state ballistics examiner was able to rule out both the shotgun and the assault rifle, and there really was no way to know whether the 9mm was the weapon used in the murder or not.
Detectives seem to be back at square one until a woman walks into the Jackson police station with new information. The woman's name is Jennifer Childs, and she says she's a former girlfriend of Brian Ellis.
She had seen news reports about the murder and had decided to come forward. She had told police that she had been with Brian the night of the murder at about 10:30, just a short time after the murder had occurred.
Childs says that Ellis came over to her house that night looking extremely agitated. When she asked him what was wrong, he said he'd gotten into a fight with another man.
He didn't give a name, but he said he was at the guy's apartment complex in the parking lot. He had fired 2 shots, and the guy fell down, and shortly thereafter he got in his car and left.
He didn't know whether the man was alive or dead, that he had shot him twice.
While Jennifer doesn't know the victim's identity, the details fit Barry Odom's murder to a T. And to back up their case, investigators ask Jennifer to confirm Brian's identity.
We know we had our guy. We try to line them up in a 6-man non-suggestive photo lineup, and we let that witness pick that person out. And so we get all this evidence and put it in the underlying facts and circumstances, and we present it to a judge. And we show it to her, tell me, is this the person that told you that he killed Mr. Odom? And she picked that picture out.
Brian Ellis is arrested and charged with the first-degree murder of Barry Odom. His trial begins on October 2nd, 2013. Prosecutors describe Ellis as a man driven by jealousy and rage.
You know, Cheryl was his possession. No one could have her, if he couldn't.
When Ellis found out Cheryl was dating Barry, that jealousy had quickly spiraled out of control.
The bizarre thing about Ellis is that he had multiple girlfriends and he had been living with someone else for 13 years. And when Cheryl started dating someone else, he became enraged with jealousy.
Prosecutors lay out the circumstantial evidence against Ellis, including the threats Barry himself had described to friends. Prosecutors tell the jury they believe Ellis made good on his threats the night of March 8th.
That night, Cheryl gave Ellis a ride back to his house, and he must have become suspicious and followed her back.
He borrowed a car to follow her back to the motel.
Barry leaves the motel to get ready for his other date with Joyce. Brian Ellis probably follows him back to his apartment from there.
The state believes that Ellis then confronted Barry in the parking lot and took his revenge.
I think it was just he wanted to get Odom out the picture.
To prove their theory, prosecutors enter Ellis's cell phone records into evidence.
Cell tower information puts Brian Ellis in the area of Barry Odom's apartment at the time of the shooting. Moments after the shooting, he phoned Jennifer Childs from that location. This confirmed her story that he had come to see her that night.
Ellis's attorneys concede there was an altercation with Barry Odom, but they insist that the shooting was in self-defense.
Brian claimed, that Barry tried to jump him. There was no evidence to suggest that.
Barry did not have a gun, so who in their right mind is going to attack someone who doesn't have a gun?
The jury is unconvinced.
It took the jury only 2 hours to convict Brian Ellis in the murder of Barry Odom. I think the quickness of the verdict, it suggests that the prosecution had a good case.
On October 4th, 2013, more than 2.5 years after the murder of Barry Odom, Brian Ellis is sentenced to life in prison. For Barry's family, the victory is bittersweet.
It's not a day go by that I don't think about Barry. His picture is all around the house, so I look at him and just remember how much I loved him.
Probably the hardest thing is not having him for all those milestones in life. Being valedictorian, high school, homecoming queen. I'm thankful for the time that I did have with him.
I am so proud to be that child's mother, and I miss him dearly.
One man's jealousy and ego had cost another man his life and forever changed the lives of those he helped.
It's a sad case. Barry was only 36 years old. That's basically the prime of your life. His life was taken away just by some jealous individual who just wanted to have that complete control over a woman, and for no good reason whatsoever.